the psychology of people who are too aware. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. Carl Jung. Have you ever felt like you notice too much, feel too deeply, or understand things most people overlook? Today on Spiritual Wisdom, we dive into the psychology of people who are too aware, exploring what it truly means to live with heightened consciousness through Carl Jung's profound insights. As you listen, reflect on your own awareness and let me know in the comments, do you see this depth as a gift, a burden, or both? Your journey of understanding might begin right here. 1. Awareness feels like a quiet curse. Being overly aware means living in a constant state of observation, where thoughts, emotions, and even the smallest interactions are continuously analyzed, broken down, and examined from every angle. It feels like living with the lights always on inside the mind, where nothing is allowed to exist in shadow or simplicity. Every reaction is questioned, every feeling is traced back to its origin, and every moment is mentally replayed long after it has passed. What might appear calm on the surface often hides an intense inner activity beneath, and this relentless perception turns ordinary experiences into complex psychological landscapes. Instead of resting into life, the overly aware person studies it, dissects it, and measures it against hidden meanings that others may never notice. This heightened perception often feels like a burden rather than a gift. While others move through their days with natural ease, the overly aware individual carries the invisible weight of constant mental movement. Rest becomes difficult, not because the body cannot slow down, but because the mind refuses to release its grip on awareness. Presence feels fragile, constantly threatened by the next realization, the next emotional insight, the next uncomfortable truth. Even moments that should bring peace are filtered through layers of interpretation, making stillness feel unfamiliar and silence feel crowded. This is why awareness can feel like a quiet curse. It does not scream, it does not demand attention openly, but it never truly leaves. Yet within this struggle lies the deeper tension of spirituality and spiritual awakening. Awareness awakens not only perception, but also responsibility. Once something is seen clearly, it cannot be unseen. The overly aware person begins to notice patterns beneath behavior, emotional undercurrents beneath words, and hidden motivations beneath surface actions. This sensitivity can feel isolating because it exposes truths that many are not ready to face. Carl Jung captured this tension when he suggested that the path to consciousness is not about seeking light, but about making the darkness visible. The overly aware do not escape the shadow. They are drawn into it repeatedly, learning to navigate fear, attachment, insecurity, and contradiction as part of their inner evolution. The exhaustion that comes with awareness is not merely mental, it is emotional and existential. Seeing clearly means feeling deeply, and feeling deeply means being touched by both beauty and pain with equal intensity. The overly aware often sense emotional shifts in rooms before a word is spoken, recognize unspoken wounds in others, and perceive subtle changes in themselves that signal internal conflict. This depth can make the world feel heavier because it removes the protective filter that ignorance provides. While others may dismiss discomfort or delay reflection, the overly aware confront it immediately, whether they wish to or not. At the same time, awareness is not meant to remain a burden forever. Over time, If integrated rather than resisted, it begins to transform. What once felt like relentless analysis can evolve into conscious understanding. What once felt like emotional overload can mature into discernment and compassion. Awareness slowly teaches the mind when to observe and when to release, when to reflect, and when to simply exist. This is where the deeper movement of spiritual awakening reveals itself, not as endless thinking, but as the gradual training of perception into wisdom. The lights that once felt harsh and blinding slowly soften, becoming guides instead of interrogators. In this way, awareness reshapes identity from the inside out. It breaks automatic behavior, dissolves unconscious attachments, and exposes false sense of self built on safety and social conditioning. The overly aware person begins to see where they perform instead of live, where they react instead of choose, and where fear disguises itself as logic. This clarity can feel uncomfortable, even destabilizing, but it is also the gateway to inner freedom. Awareness strips away illusions, not to punish, but to reveal what is real. 2. Hyper-awareness creates emotional distance and fatigue. People who are too aware live in a constant state of metacognition. You do not only think, you watch yourself thinking, and this creates extraordinary depth, but also a quiet distance between you and the present moment. Instead of being fully immersed in what is happening, a part of you is always standing back, observing, measuring, interpreting. You feel emotions, yet at the same time, you analyze them. You listen, yet you are already predicting where the conversation will go. You exist inside experience while simultaneously standing outside of it. Over time, this split slowly drains your energy, not through physical effort, but through the endless mental movement of observation. This is why emotional fatigue often touches those who are deeply aware you are always on, always witnessing, always processing, and rarely resting inside simple presence. This heightened awareness can quietly create emotional distance. You may care deeply, yet still feel detached. You may desire closeness, yet sense a subtle wall between you and others. Because you see patterns so quickly, you often brace for outcomes before they arrive, protecting yourself before anything even happens. In relationships, this can feel like carrying invisible knowledge that others do not see, feeling shifts in energy, sensing emotional undercurrents, reading silence as clearly as speech. And while this ability can feel like a gift, it can also isolate you, making ordinary connections feel shallow, even when you long for something real and grounding. Carl Jung once hinted at this inner tension when he spoke about the journey toward wholeness, where awareness must eventually return to embodiment, not remain trapped in endless reflection. Yet this same awareness is also the door to deep spirituality, because you recognize your inner movements with rare clarity. You are able to witness your fears, your defenses, your desires, and your contradictions without immediately running from them. This makes true spiritual development possible, not as an escape into invisibility, but as a gradual return to presence. The shift begins when you no longer use awareness only to observe life, but to soften back into it. When you allow yourself to feel without instantly interpreting, to be moved without immediately understanding why, the inner fatigue begins to loosen. Awareness stops being a weight and becomes a guide. You begin to realize that you do not need to decode every moment for it to be meaningful, and that sometimes The most powerful growth happens when you allow experience to touch you directly. For the over-aware soul, the real healing does not come from sharpening perception even more, but from learning when to relax it. Emotional distance is not a flaw in your heart, but a signal asking for balance. When awareness is blended with presence instead of control, sensitivity becomes strength rather than exhaustion. You begin to re-enter the moment instead of orbiting it. The lesson here is simple yet profound. Not every truth needs immediate analysis. Not every feeling needs dissection. And not every silence demands interpretation. When you learn to pause your constant observation and let life meet you where you are, your awareness no longer separates you from the world. It finally returns you to it. If this message resonates with you, affirm it in the comments by writing, "I choose balance over overload." Your awareness is powerful. Now let's learn to use it without burning out. 3. They carry an intuitive but heavy empathy. Overly aware individuals carry an intuitive but heavy empathy. And if this is you, then you already know you don't simply hear words, you feel what hides beneath them, sensing emotional shifts, lies, and subtle tensions with an accuracy that surprises even you. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks inside awakens." And your awakening often comes through this deep emotional radar that picks up every change in tone, every forced smile, every unspoken frustration. You instinctively detect what others overlook. And while this ability is powerful, it can also become overwhelming because you absorb emotions that were never yours to carry. This is why you may feel exhausted after small interactions, why crowded rooms feel heavy, and why you sometimes need silence just to return to yourself. Your empathy is not just sensitivity, it is a heightened form of perception, a way your mind and body read the world that goes far beyond logic. Empathy comes with weight, because being able to read people so deeply means you cannot easily ignore dishonesty, emotional instability, or suppressed anger. You pick up these signals without permission, and they settle in your nervous system as if they belong to you. Jung reminded us that the pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, and overly aware people often live in this delicate swing, trying to make sense of emotions that don't originate from within while still trying to remain grounded. This constant intake of emotional information can cloud your clarity and even confuse your identity, making you ask yourself whether what you feel is truly yours or simply absorbed from someone else's inner chaos. Yet what you carry is also a rare gift, one that allows you to understand pain without explanation and see truth without evidence. Still, spiritual wisdom teaches that empathy must be guided by boundaries. Otherwise, it becomes self-sacrifice. Your ability to sense hidden meaning is powerful, but it was never meant to be a burden that drains your spirit. You were not meant to hold the emotional weight of every room you walk into. Jung taught, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And your sensitivity forces you into this consciousness early, revealing the shadows in others long before they reveal them themselves. This can make you feel alone, misunderstood, or emotionally older than the people around you. But with awareness comes the opportunity to transform this depth into strength if you learn to separate what you feel from what you absorb. When you begin to honor your own energy, protect your emotional space, and recognize that your empathy is a tool rather than a burden, everything shifts. You stop drowning in the intensity of others and start navigating life with clarity and emotional freedom. And this is the hidden beauty of being overly aware. Once your empathy is supported by spiritual wisdom and grounded boundaries, your sensitivity becomes not only your strength, but your greatest source of insight, intuition, and truth. 4. Overthinking becomes a survival mechanism. Overthinking did not begin as a weakness. It began as a form of protection. For many hyper-aware individuals, this heightened sensitivity was shaped in childhood as a direct response to chaotic, unpredictable, or emotionally unsafe environments. In these early years, danger was not always physical, but emotional, subtle, and shifting. A raised voice, a sudden silence, a cold look, or an unpredictable mood could all signal threat. The mind learned quickly that survival depended on vigilance, and so awareness sharpened, scanning every detail, tracking every emotional shift, anticipating what might happen next before it arrived. What started as moment-to-moment danger detection slowly evolved into a deeply ingrained habit of constant analysis. The child learned to read people before they spoke, to measure tone before words, to monitor their own behavior closely in order to stay safe. Over time, this vigilance no longer switched off. It became automatic. The mind learned to stay in a permanent state of alertness, always thinking ahead, always preparing for what could go wrong. This is how overthinking became not just behavior, but identity, a way of existing in the world built on prediction, control, and invisible self-monitoring. As adulthood arrived, the environment may have changed, but the nervous system did not catch up. The external danger faded, yet the internal radar remained fully active. Conversations became puzzles to decode. Relationships became territory to navigate carefully, and silence itself could feel threatening, because the mind had learned that calm often preceded emotional storms. Overthinking became a way to maintain the illusion of control, as if seeing everything in advance might prevent pain from happening again. Carl Jung knew this pattern well, and warned that what is not made conscious will appear in our lives as fate. When overthinking remains unconscious, it quietly directs decisions, reactions, and relationships. A person may believe they are simply careful, intelligent, or just wired this way, while the original survival fear continues to operate beneath the surface. The mind works endlessly, not because it is free, but because it once learned that stillness was unsafe. At the same time, this extreme awareness does not exist only on the psychological level. It often carries the early signals of spirituality and spiritual awakening as well. The same sensitivity that once scanned for danger also becomes sensitive to emotional undercurrents, hidden intentions, and subtle energy. Hyper-aware individuals often feel deeply, perceive deeply, and sense what others miss. Yet without healing, this gift becomes fused with fear, turning perception into tension instead of wisdom. This is the inner conflict many hyper-aware people live with. The mind is sharp, intuitive, and insightful, yet also restless, exhausted, and burdened by endless internal dialogue. They can understand others deeply, but struggle to feel at ease within themselves. Their awareness became wide before it became grounded. Their perception opened before their nervous system learned safety. True healing begins when this survival awareness is no longer treated as identity, but as a learned response that once served a purpose. Overthinking does not dissolve through force or suppression, but through understanding. As awareness becomes conscious, it begins to loosen its grip. The mind learns that safety no longer has to be earned through vigilance. The same intelligence that once scanned for danger can slowly transform into discernment. The same sensitivity that once guarded against harm can mature into clarity, intuition, and quiet self-trust. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to like and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next insight. In the comments, affirm your growth by typing, "I choose peace over overthinking." 5. They struggle with self-trust and spontaneity. They struggle deeply with self-trust and spontaneity because their minds are constantly wired to simulate future scenarios, analyze emotions, and anticipate outcomes before anything even happens. And while this heightened awareness gives them sharp insight and foresight, it also quietly steals their peace and their ability to move freely in the moment, trapping them in what is often called analysis paralysis, where every decision feels heavy and every action is delayed by invisible doubt. Anxiety then disguises itself as preparedness, convincing them they are being responsible and cautious, when in reality, they are often shielding themselves from uncertainty rather than living through it. They replay conversations that have not yet happened, rehearse failures that may never come, and measure every feeling as if it must be fully understood before it can be trusted. And over time, this relentless mental activity erodes their confidence in their own inner voice, making even simple choices feel overwhelming and risky. Yet this hyper-awareness does not mean something is wrong with them. It reflects a sensitivity to the deeper layers of life that many people move past without noticing. As Carl Jung once implied, thinking is difficult. That is why most people judge. And for the overly aware, thinking becomes not just difficult, but exhausting, especially when it turns inward as endless self-monitoring rather than conscious self-understanding. Their awareness keeps them suspended between what might happen and what already happened, pulling them away from what is actually happening right now, which is the only place where real trust can be built. This is where spirituality and spiritual development become not abstract ideas, but vital grounding forces, teaching them to balance awareness with surrender, analysis with intuition, and foresight with presence. True spiritual development does not ask them to abandon their awareness, but to soften its grip so they can move with steadiness instead of hesitation, clarity instead of fear, and presence instead of constant prediction. As they begin to trust that they do not need to foresee every outcome in order to be safe, spontaneity slowly returns, not as recklessness, but as quiet confidence in their ability to meet life as it unfolds. They stop treating every emotion as a problem to be solved and begin to recognize feelings as signals meant to be felt, not dissected into exhaustion. This shift transforms their relationship with themselves from one of harsh scrutiny to one of inner cooperation, where the mind no longer dominates the instincts, but works alongside them. In that harmony, anxiety loses its disguise as preparedness and reveals itself as unresolved fear, asking to be met with compassion rather than control. When that fear is met with awareness, grounded in stillness instead of tension. They begin to understand that self-trust does not come from having all the answers, but from knowing they can move forward even without them. Awareness becomes wisdom only when paired with courage. Insight becomes growth only when it leads to action. And spirituality becomes real only when it changes how gently they treat themselves in moments of uncertainty. The deeper message is simple but challenging. Stop waiting until you feel completely ready. Practice listening to your inner response without immediately questioning it. Allow small risks to rebuild your confidence in your own choices. And remember that uncertainty is not the enemy of growth, but the very space where trust, spirituality, and true spiritual development quietly take root. 6. They sacrifice themselves for emotional harmony. When you are someone who feels everything too deeply and sees everything too clearly, you often end up sacrificing yourself for emotional harmony without even realizing it, because your mind is always alert, reading every shift in tone, every change in expression, every unspoken tension. And before anyone else notices the slightest discomfort, you have already adjusted yourself to keep the peace. You soften your voice, you hide your needs, you offer reassurance, and you take responsibility for emotions that were never yours to carry. And although this looks like strength to the outside world, it slowly becomes a quiet form of self-abandonment that leaves you drained and unseen. In relationships, you tend to prioritize others so instinctively that your own emotional world becomes secondary. And while people admire your empathy and emotional intelligence, they rarely offer you the same depth of understanding in return, leaving you stuck in a pattern where you are the healer, the stabilizer, the one who just gets it, even when you are hurting. As Carl Jung famously said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And for someone like you, who has been trained by life to carry the emotional temperature of every room, accepting yourself completely means giving yourself permission to feel anger, disappointment, or exhaustion instead of pushing those emotions aside so that others can remain comfortable. This habit of self-sacrifice often has roots deeper than you realize, shaped by childhood environments where emotional safety depended on your ability to anticipate tension before it erupted, teaching your nervous system that peace must be earned through self-erasure. You may notice that the moment someone around you becomes upset, your body reacts immediately. Your thoughts race, your chest tightens, and you replay the entire conversation to see if you caused the problem, even when you know logically that you didn't. This constant emotional scanning becomes exhausting, leaving you spiritually depleted because you're carrying the weight of everyone's discomfort while no one carries yours. Yet spiritual wisdom reminds you that the issue isn't your sensitivity, it's your boundaries. Jung warned, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And many highly aware individuals unconsciously repeat relational patterns where they are valued for their empathy but overlooked in their vulnerability, creating connections that look peaceful on the surface but feel lonely underneath. You don't need to suppress your sensitivity to fix this pattern. You need to redirect it. You are allowed to say, "That hurt me." You are allowed to ask, "Can you listen to me the way I listen to you?" You are allowed to let others sit with their own discomfort instead of rescuing them every single time. Harmony built on your silence is not harmony. It is self-loss. The truth is that your emotional depth is a gift, but it becomes a burden when you use it only to serve others and never to protect yourself. Real growth happens when you bring your empathy and your truth into the same space, when you show up with both compassion and boundaries, and when you allow your needs to matter just as much as the needs you endlessly tend to. And in that shift, something powerful awakens within you. The understanding that your role is not to be an emotional shield for everyone else, but to create relationships where your awareness is valued, your heart is seen, and your peace finally includes you. If this message about sacrificing for emotional harmony resonated with you, comment, "I choose emotional balance" below. Your voice helps us connect on a deeper level. 7. Awareness. Without boundaries becomes suffering. Awareness without boundaries becomes a silent pressure on your soul. Because when you feel everything too deeply and notice every subtle shift in the people around you, awareness stops being a tool of insight and slowly turns into a burden of responsibility, pulling you into the exhausting belief that every emotion must be understood, every silence decoded, and every problem fixed. You begin to operate as if your mind must stay alert at all times, scanning the emotional weather of everyone you encounter, trying to prevent conflict, disappointment, or discomfort before it even happens. And without noticing it, you drift from clarity into control, from sensitivity into hypervigilance, until your inner world feels like a room with no doors, constantly flooded with impressions, expectations, and the unspoken weight of other people's moods. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And this pattern of over-awareness is exactly that, an unconscious attempt to manage the world through perception alone, as if your awareness could stop bad things from happening or keep people from hurting. But the deeper truth is that without emotional boundaries, awareness becomes suffering. Because when you believe you must interpret every signal, you lose the ability to simply be. And when you feel responsible for every shift in the atmosphere, you forget how to breathe in your own rhythm. This is where spirituality and spiritual awakening step in as a gentle correction, reminding you that the purpose of awareness is not to control life, but to experience it with presence, and that not every sensation needs a story, not every feeling requires a solution, and not every disturbance is yours to carry. Awareness matures into wisdom only when you learn to let go. Because letting go does not mean ignoring reality. It means releasing the illusion that your constant analysis can prevent pain, confusion, or change. As you begin to accept that some things must be observed rather than fixed, a quiet transformation unfolds. Your mind stops gripping so tightly, your nervous system stops bracing for impact, and your heart stops bending itself into impossible shapes to accommodate everyone else's energy. Awareness softens into discernment when you honor your boundaries, and discernment becomes peace when you stop turning your sensitivity into self-punishment. Over time, you realize that the world does not collapse when you stop decoding every silence, that people will survive without you managing their emotions, and that clarity does not come from overthinking, but from allowing. In this shift, your inner landscape begins to calm, not because life becomes easier, but because you stop exhausting yourself with the belief that your awareness must always intervene. You finally understand that true strength is not constant vigilance, but the courage to surrender, to trust that life carries its own intelligence, and to let your awareness serve you instead of imprisoning you. And with this understanding, awareness becomes a gift again, one that illuminates rather than overwhelms, guides rather than controls, and ultimately leads you back to your own peace. 8. Awareness, when balanced, becomes a quiet superpower. Awareness, when held with balance, becomes a quiet superpower that moves through your life almost invisibly, yet transforms everything from within. Because when your deep perception is guided by self-compassion, emotional maturity, and the courage to release what is no longer yours to carry, it stops feeling like a heavy, overwhelming sensitivity and begins to function as intuition, empathy, creativity, and a deeper understanding of human nature. You start to see that awareness is not something you must silence or turn off, but something you must learn to hold gently, like light resting on water. And the more you soften your grip on it, the more clearly it reveals truth without destabilizing your inner world. Hyper-awareness becomes harmful only when it is unsupported by gentleness. But when rooted in spirituality and shaped through steady spiritual development, it evolves into a refined way of sensing life and ability to notice the subtle, understand the unspoken, and perceive the emotional landscapes of others without getting lost in them. Instead of reacting to every thought as if it is urgent or absorbing every feeling as if it belongs to you, you begin to simply witness your inner world with patience. This witnessing dissolves the tension that awareness once created, allowing you to stand inside your perceptions without drowning in them. You understand that not everything you detect needs your intervention. Not every emotion requires analysis, and not every shift in someone's behavior is a message for you to decode. As you grow emotionally, your awareness transforms into a stable inner compass rather than a constant alarm, guiding you through conversations, decisions, and relationships with greater clarity and less inner noise. And gradually, a quiet truth becomes clear. Awareness without grounding leads to exhaustion, but awareness carried with softness becomes insight. You can listen deeply to others without depleting your own energy. You can sense emotional change without losing your balance. You can feel the atmosphere of a room without letting it control your mood. This is the moment where your intuition strengthens, not through mental overthinking, but through your ability to trust the natural intelligence of your inner self. Your mind stops gripping every detail in fear and instead begins to respond with choice, discernment, and calm. Through this shift, awareness no longer isolates you. It connects you. It helps you love more honestly, create more authentically, and live more peacefully. It expands your empathy while strengthening your boundaries. It sharpens your perception without hardening your heart. It teaches you that stillness does not mean shutting down your mind. It means standing rooted while the world passes through you without chaos. When you hold awareness lightly, you find peace in the present moment. Peace not born from ignorance, but from understanding. And as this balance takes shape within you, awareness becomes less of a burden and more of a silent guide, leading you toward deeper clarity, gentler decisions, and a way of being that honors both your sensitivity and your strength. If you find this content touching your heart, please consider becoming a member to receive more in-depth lessons and direct support from me. In the end, the psychology of people who are too aware is not a burden. It is a profound gift. Their depth, intuition, and emotional intelligence reveal layers of reality that many never notice. And understanding this helps us honor our own inner complexity with clarity and compassion. If this message resonates with you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who may need these insights, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming videos filled with deeper understanding, self-awareness, and the teachings of Carl Jung, the psychological reason adult children turn against their parents. The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. Carl Jung. Welcome back to Spiritual Wisdom. Today, we're diving into one of the most painful and misunderstood experiences a parent can face: when an adult child turns away. In this video, we explore the deep psychological forces often hidden in the unconscious that shape distance, resentment, and silence within families. More importantly, we uncover what these patterns mean for your own healing, growth, and emotional freedom. As you listen, I invite you to reflect on your own story. Have you ever experienced this kind of emotional separation, either as a parent or as a child? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your voice may bring comfort to someone who feels alone. Let's begin this journey toward clarity, compassion, and inner peace. 1. The pain of parental abandonment. Of all human heartbreaks, few cut as deeply as watching your own children pull away. Because when a parent who once gave everything now sits in front of a silent phone or an empty doorway, it feels like the universe has collapsed into a single unanswered question. Why did the people I loved the most choose to leave me behind? Yet Carl Jung reminds us that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. And through this lens, the distance between parent and child becomes not just an act of rejection, but a complex psychological and spiritual response to years of unspoken emotional weight. Many adult children do not wake up one day and suddenly decide to abandon their parents. Instead, this distance forms slowly through unresolved conflicts, repeated moments of feeling unheard, years of subtle criticism, or the quiet expectation that they must sacrifice their own identity to maintain harmony. What looks like coldness is often the child's attempt to breathe, because for some, every interaction triggers old wounds: guilt, pressure, comparison, or the feeling that love must be earned rather than freely given. And when the nervous system associates a parent with emotional danger instead of emotional safety, withdrawal becomes a form of survival. From the outside, the parent may only see disrespect, ingratitude, or sudden disinterest. But underneath, the adult child may be fleeing from patterns that shaped their entire upbringing. Patterns the parent may not even realize existed. Jung warned that nothing shapes a child more than the parts of a parent's life the parent refused to face, and many children carry not just their own pain, but the emotional burdens their parents never resolved. Loneliness masked as control, fear disguised as criticism, disappointment hidden inside high expectations. When this weight becomes too heavy, separation becomes not an attack, but a desperate act of self-preservation. Spiritually, some souls choose families that challenge them in the deepest ways so that they may awaken, break generational cycles, and rediscover their true identity beyond the roles placed upon them. This process of spiritual awakening can appear harsh, especially to the parent who feels abandoned, but on a soul level, it is an attempt to heal wounds that have echoed across generations. For many parents, this distance feels like betrayal, yet it is often the result of misunderstandings that accumulated over years. A child who was constantly told to be strong may now avoid the parent because they were never allowed to be vulnerable. A child who was scolded for expressing emotions may now protect themselves through silence. A child who was expected to care for a parent's feelings may now cut contact to finally build their own life without carrying emotional debts they never chose. This does not mean the parent was intentionally hurtful. It means the emotional landscape of the family was shaped by unspoken rules, survival patterns, and inherited pain that no one was taught how to navigate. But when the parent dares to look inward instead of only outward, something transformative happens. The question shifts from, "Why are they doing this to me?" to "What pain have they been carrying that I have never truly seen?" And this shift opens the door to healing for both. Spirituality teaches that relationships act as mirrors, reflecting the parts of ourselves we avoid. And having your own child turn away is one of the harshest mirrors life can hold up, forcing you to confront not only who they are, but who you became through years of habit, fear, and unexamined patterns. This reflection is not meant to punish, but to awaken. Because even small shifts in awareness, learning to listen without defense, apologizing without justification, and acknowledging the emotions that were overlooked can begin to soften years of tension. Even if the child is not ready to return, the parent's inner work is never wasted, because change occurs first in energy before it appears in physical form. And when a parent commits to understanding, healing, and releasing old patterns, the emotional atmosphere of the relationship begins to shift. In the end, the distance between a parent and a child is rarely rooted in a single event. It is woven from unmet needs, unspoken truths, inherited wounds, and the difficult psychological process of carving out identity. While the past cannot be rewritten, the present can become a turning point when approached with humility, honesty, and a sincere desire to break the cycle. Because even in the silence, connection is not lost. It is waiting for the moment when both souls are ready to meet again in truth rather than in pain. 2. Common reasons for estrangement. When adult children turn away from their parents, the reasons are rarely simple. And Carl Jung's psychology shows us that estrangement often grows from emotional wounds that were never understood or healed. Many adult children still carry scars from childhood, especially if they felt their parents were too strict, too controlling, or emotionally unavailable. And even when you believed you were doing the best you could, your child may have experienced those moments as pressure, fear, or a loss of safety. This emotional memory doesn't disappear with age. It lingers in the subconscious, shaping how they relate to you now. When they distance themselves, it is often a form of self-protection, an attempt to escape emotions they never learned to process, not a direct rejection of your worth or identity as a parent. Yet beyond personal history, society itself plays a powerful role in widening the gap between parents and children. Because modern culture glorifies independence and subtly teaches that caring for parents is a burden rather than a blessing. The media encourages cutting ties as a symbol of strength and choosing yourself, without acknowledging the heartbreak left behind. Many young adults absorb the belief that emotional boundaries mean avoidance, that healing means disconnecting, and that adulthood means forgetting where they came from. This cultural shift creates an invisible wall between generations, making love feel heavy and responsibility feel old-fashioned. Family conflict adds another layer, because unhealed tension has a long memory. Jung once said, "What is not made conscious appears in our lives as fate," and this is painfully true within families. Past divorces, arguments, betrayals, financial stress, remarriages, or years of silent resentment create emotional cracks that children feel deeply. Even when the conflict is over, the emotional climate it created can linger for decades. Adult children may step away, not because they do not care, but because the atmosphere of the past still feels unsafe or heavy. The problem is that their distance shows up as coldness, while the true reason is unspoken pain. However, another side must also be acknowledged: entitlement and lack of gratitude. Some adult children take their parents for granted, believing they owe nothing in return for the sacrifices made for them. This mindset is fueled by a culture that tells individuals they are self-made, ignoring the love, labor, and sleepless nights that shaped their foundation. When adult children operate from entitlement, they may dismiss their parents' needs, minimize their sacrifices, and behave with indifference or disrespect. This is not a reflection of your failures, but of their lack of emotional maturity and spiritual development. When you place these truths side by side, a larger picture emerges, one that blends psychology with spirituality. Estrangement is not only a relationship issue, it is a mirror showing the unhealed wounds on both sides and the cultural forces that push families apart. Jung's insight invites you to look beneath the surface and ask deeper questions about what pain remains unspoken, what generational patterns remain unresolved, and how both you and your child have been shaped by pressures far bigger than your home. Through the lens of spiritual development, you begin to see that healing starts not by demanding change from your child, but by understanding your own heart, acknowledging what you could not offer in the past, and cultivating compassion for both sides of the story. And from this understanding come the lessons. Do not let your child's distance define your worth. Look honestly at any pain you may have contributed to and offer humility rather than shame. Resist the urge to chase or beg, and instead keep your heart open with dignity. And finally, use this season to grow in your own spirituality, healing your own wounds, so that if reconciliation comes, it comes to a stronger, wiser version of you. Because even if your relationship does not repair overnight, the inner work you do becomes a quiet light that one day may guide your child back, not out of guilt, but out of genuine readiness to reconnect. 3. The Jungian perspective, individuation. Carl Jung believed that every child must eventually separate from their parents to form a true and independent identity. And when you look at this through the lens of spiritual wisdom, you begin to see that this separation is not a rejection, but a natural stage of inner growth. Individuation, as Jung called it, is the lifelong process of becoming whole. And for many adult children, this journey requires creating emotional distance from the place where their earliest patterns were formed. Yet when this natural separation becomes extreme, it does not feel like growth. It feels like abandonment, leaving both parent and child carrying wounds that neither fully understands. And here lies the painful paradox. The same child who once needed you for everything now feels the need to step away from you to find themselves. Not because they hate you, but because they are wrestling with parts of their own shadow they discovered within the relationship. This is why Jung said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent," pointing to the invisible, emotional weight children often carry without realizing it. The expectations, the fears, the dreams, and the unspoken pressures that shape them long before they are old enough to choose who they want to be. Many adult children pull away, not from the parent, but from the version of themselves they became in the parent's presence, and the distance becomes a way to escape the emotional script they were handed. A child who grows up feeling unseen may avoid the parent to avoid that feeling. A child who absorbed their parent's pain may step back to stop absorbing it. A child who never found their own voice may need silence to hear it for the first time. But from the parent's perspective, these inner battles look like coldness, disrespect, or indifference, especially when the phone stops ringing or visits become rare. Emotional estrangement is rarely caused by one dramatic moment. It is usually the result of years of unexpressed feelings, misunderstandings, unmet needs, or wounds that were never addressed. And because humans often fear confrontation, many children choose distance over dialogue, believing that space will protect them from old pain. What makes this even more complex is that both sides often feel misunderstood at the same time. Parents mourn the loss of closeness, thinking, "Where did I go wrong?" While children feel overwhelmed by emotions they cannot name, thinking, "I can't go back without losing myself." This silent tension deepens the gap until the relationship feels frozen in place. Jung warned that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And this explains why estrangement can become a cycle. Both parent and child repeat emotional patterns without realizing it, and both suffer because neither knows how to break the spell. When children turn away, the act is almost never driven by hate. It is driven by confusion, identity formation, and the deep need to rewrite their inner story without the pressure of old expectations. Yet even in this darkness, spiritual wisdom teaches that separation can create space for awareness. When the emotional noise quiets, both sides can begin to see their own patterns more clearly. Children may realize they are not running from the parent, but from their own unhealed wounds. Parents may recognize that the distance is not punishment, but a call for deeper understanding and gentler connection. And when both sides begin to understand the psychological forces at play, the relationship is no longer defined by blame, but by insight. In this light, estrangement is not the end. It is a painful invitation for both hearts to grow. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how individuation and inner growth have shaped your relationship with your parents or family. Share your experience in the comments below. And if today's message resonates with you, simply type, "I choose my authentic self," to show that you're embracing this Jungian journey with us. 4. The reality of abandoned parents. Many parents quietly confess that the deepest wound in their old age is not illness, poverty, or the slowing of their bodies, but the silence left behind by the very children they raised. Some describe it with a short, heartbreaking sentence: "I raised strangers." Behind those 3 words lies a lifetime of sacrifice, sleepless nights, unspoken worries, and small acts of love that were never recorded but were always given. When an adult child turns away, the parent does not simply lose a relationship. They lose a role, a dream, and a part of their identity. The home they once filled with noise and warmth becomes an echo chamber, reminding them of birthdays, holidays, and ordinary afternoons that will never return. Yet the truth is that this distance rarely forms overnight. It grows slowly from unresolved conflicts, emotional misunderstandings, generational wounds, or the pressures of modern life that push families apart until one day the relationship quietly fractures. Some children carry resentment from the past, from moments when parents did their best but did not know how to meet certain emotional needs. Others become consumed by their own lives, careers, marriages, stress, survival, and gradually drift away without realizing the damage their absence causes. There are also children who disconnect because they feel they must protect their mental health from patterns or expectations they never knew how to navigate. None of these explanations erase the pain of the parent, but they reveal a difficult truth. Many adult children are not rejecting their parents as humans. They are rejecting the unresolved emotional history they feel trapped inside. Carl Jung spoke to this when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Much of the distance between parents and adult children is not caused by hatred, but by unhealed emotional inheritance that neither generation fully understands. But as heavy as this reality is, there is another side, one that many elderly parents slowly discover after the initial shock of abandonment. Some begin to reclaim their inner peace through solitude. They explore hobbies they once loved but never had time for. They join community groups, volunteer programs, or small circles of friends who remind them that companionship can be found even outside of family. Through these activities, parents begin to rediscover the self that existed before the identity of motherhood or fatherhood took over their entire life. They reconnect with forgotten passions, creativity, and personal purpose, realizing that their story does not end simply because a child has stepped away. This quiet return to the self is not a form of giving up. It is a form of returning home. It allows parents to experience a deeper kind of peace, one that arises from being present with themselves rather than waiting for validation or affection that may never come. This journey also reveals a subtle truth. When you stop chasing what is absent, you begin to see the value of what is still present within you. Many parents who once felt hollow eventually find strength in this rediscovery, learning that while the heartbreak of abandonment leaves a scar, it does not have to define the rest of their life. Some even find that solitude opens a door to healing they never expected, helping them grow into a version of themselves that feels more authentic, more grounded, and more at peace than ever before. 5. Transformation through solitude. Solitude becomes a powerful turning point in your life because, as Carl Jung explained, Suffering is not just a wound, but a doorway to individuation, the deep inner process where you stop living as a reflection of others and begin to return to your true self. When the noise falls away and you have no one left to impress or perform for, you are forced into an honest meeting with your own soul. And although this silence can feel sharp and uncomfortable, it is often the only environment where real spiritual development can begin. In that quiet space, you start noticing the patterns you used to ignore, the emotional wounds you avoided, and the parts of yourself you buried under responsibility, relationships, and expectations. Loneliness becomes a mirror that shows you where you have abandoned yourself long before anyone else ever did. As you sit with your inner world, something shifts inside you. The pain you once feared begins to reveal its meaning, and the emptiness that felt unbearable starts teaching you what you truly need. Jung believed that this internal confrontation is the heart of transformation because facing your shadow, your fears, regrets, suppressed emotions breaks the illusion that you must stay the same to be loved. When you look inward long enough, you begin to see that solitude is not punishment, but purification, a slow removal of everything false, everything that no longer fits the person you are becoming. This is why people often find unexpected strength in their darkest hours. The silence pushes them to grow roots where they once had only reactions, and in that stillness, wisdom begins to form. Solitude strengthens intuition, deepens emotional clarity, and reveals the quiet truths that constant distraction kept hidden, allowing you to step into spirituality not as an escape, but as a deeper understanding of your own nature. Through this journey, you realize that the loneliness you feared is actually shaping your inner character, helping you reclaim the parts of yourself you abandoned to keep the peace or meet expectations. Every painful memory that rises in solitude becomes an opportunity for healing. Every uncomfortable realization becomes a step toward wholeness. Jung taught that individuation is the slow integration of all your pieces, the light, the shadow, the past, and the future into someone authentic and complete. And solitude is where that integration begins. Your suffering becomes the fire that refines you. Your silence becomes the teacher that guides you. And your spiritual strength grows not from avoiding the darkness, but from learning how to walk through it. The lesson hidden inside this process is simple. When you allow solitude to work on you, it reveals your truth, restores your power, and leads you toward a version of yourself that no longer breaks under pressure, but stands rooted in clarity, purpose, and inner peace. If this message resonates with you, declare your strength in the comments. In solitude, I transform. 6. Coping strategies and healing. Healing from a child's abandonment is not a simple process, but a deep inner journey where the spiritual wisdom of Carl Jung becomes a guide that helps you understand your pain and reclaim your strength, reminding you that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent, and showing you how unresolved wounds from the past can silently shape the relationship you have with your children. That is why the first lesson is learning to set boundaries, because loving your child does not mean tolerating humiliation, disrespect, or emotional manipulation. And every time you gently but firmly say, I deserve to be treated with dignity, you reclaim a part of yourself that you may have forgotten while giving everything to your family. honoring Jung's teaching that what you allow unconsciously continues until you consciously stop it. Yet even with boundaries, the pain remains heavy until you allow yourself to grieve honestly, letting yourself cry, admit the heartbreak, and speak your truth without shame. Because as Rumi said, the wound is the place where the light enters you, and acknowledging your grief becomes an act of courage that begins to release the weight you have been carrying alone for so long. That honesty naturally leads to the need for connection, because isolation will convince you that you are unworthy. But rebuilding community through friendships, support groups, faith circles, volunteering, or simply opening up to people who genuinely care reminds you that love doesn't vanish just because your child pulled away. This widening circle of support slowly replaces the haunting silence, giving you emotional safety and reminding you that your story continues even when a part of it has been broken. From there, rediscovering your purpose becomes essential, because when children walk away, many parents feel like their entire identity disappears with them. Yet Jung reminds us that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, meaning that your life still holds meaning beyond the label of parent. This is your invitation to return to passions you once buried: writing, gardening, creating, teaching, learning, traveling, or helping others. And as you pour your energy into something that makes your soul feel alive, you begin rebuilding the self that was overshadowed by years of sacrifice. And through all of these steps, the most transformative layer is learning to seek meaning, not by pretending everything is fine, but by exploring what this pain is teaching you about boundaries, self-worth, forgiveness, compassion, and the unresolved wounds you may still carry from your own childhood. You may find meaning in faith, in talking honestly with God, or in serving others who are hurting, or in creativity as you turn your pain into art, stories, or quiet acts of beauty that restore your sense of purpose. This shift finding meaning where there was only loss turns you into the alchemist of your own soul. Someone who transforms heartbreak into clarity and sorrow into growth. As Viktor Frankl wrote, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And through setting boundaries, grieving with honesty, rebuilding community, rediscovering purpose, and seeking meaning, you step out of the role of the abandoned parent and into the role of someone who is healing, awakening, and remembering their own worth. 7. The spiritual lesson behind the pain. When children turn away from their parents, life is not simply closing a door. It is redirecting you back to your own soul, urging you to reclaim the parts of yourself that were forgotten while you were giving, sacrificing, and carrying the weight of everyone else's needs except your own. The heartbreak cuts deeply because it comes from the very people you once held as infants, the ones you stayed awake for, worried for, and protected with everything you had. Yet the deeper meaning behind this pain is that it is not an ending, but a powerful invitation into transformation, authenticity, and freedom from emotional dependency. The silence, the absence, the unanswered calls can feel like rejection, but underneath that pain is a sacred message. You are being called to rediscover your worth beyond your role as a parent, to understand that your dignity and capacity for joy are not determined by who walks away, and to remember that your identity is rooted in something far more enduring than another person's approval. Even when family ties fail, your heart does not lose its value. Your spirit does not lose its shine. This is where spirituality and spiritual development begin to guide you, reminding you that your existence has meaning independent of whether your children stay close or drift far. Sometimes, the absence of loved ones awakens a deeper presence within you, a resilience that only emerges when everything external collapses. You begin to sense that the emptiness is not a void, but a clearing, a space where your soul can breathe again after years of being overshadowed by responsibility and emotional pressure. Through this space, you slowly rediscover the courage to live fully, not as someone defined by others, but as someone who belongs to themselves. As you walk through this emotional valley, you may notice a shift within you. You become less controlled by guilt, less burdened by unspoken expectations, and more able to set gentle but firm boundaries that protect your peace. You begin to understand that love does not mean allowing disrespect, that forgiveness does not require abandoning yourself, and that closeness is not the same as loyalty. You stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start asking, "What is life trying to awaken in me through this pain?" When you look at the situation through this lens, the suffering that once felt cruel becomes a teacher that reveals hidden layers of strength, self-respect, and emotional clarity. Gradually, the pain softens and something new emerges, a quiet but powerful recognition that even in the most desolate seasons, your soul is not broken, but being reshaped. You learn that you can live even without constant validation, that you can find joy that does not depend on anyone's presence, and that you can build an inner home no one can abandon. In this way, the very experience that once felt like devastation becomes the beginning of a deeper, wiser relationship with yourself, rooted in spirituality, grounded in self-worth, and strengthened through spiritual development. If today's message spoke to the deeper spiritual lesson within your pain, take a moment to ground that awareness. Comment below, "I choose healing," to honor your inner growth and encourage others to face their own truth with strength. In the end, Carl Jung's insight reminds us that when adult children turn away, it is rarely about simple disrespect. It is a reflection of unhealed wounds, unspoken pain, and patterns carried through generations. Understanding this truth does not erase the hurt, but it does give you the power to respond with clarity, compassion, and strength. Healing begins when awareness replaces blame, and when love becomes a conscious choice rather than an old expectation. If this message brought you clarity or comfort, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Your journey toward deeper understanding and healing continues here.